Stephen A. Douglas was born in Vermont in 1813. And while he grew up in Vermont, he decided he wanted to go west in order to pass the bar exam. He thought it would be much easier to pass the bar exam in some of the burgeoning territories of the United States, and so went west and landed in Illinois, the Wild West at the time. Imagine that. I grew up in Indiana. I don't even know what that would be, but passed the bar then in 1834, and then immediately went into politics. Douglas supported Andrew Jackson and became a representative of the U.S. in 1836. Became a representative of the Illinois legislature in 1836, and then served in the Illinois Supreme Court from then until 1843. In 1843, Stephen Douglas became a U.S. representative out of Illinois, new territory. And then in 1847, the legislature voted him to be their senator, one of two senators that Illinois had, and became just a great man in the Senate. Stephen Douglas was well respected and someone who was well liked by his colleagues. He was one of the few statesmen at the time. It really honed and crafted the idea of speeches and logic, and it was said that when he spoke, he drew you to himself, and he was very precise with his language. He was very focused on the things that he knew about. There's a lot of things he didn't know about. He rarely quoted classic literature, but he was very much focused on the task at hand, and very capable and able speaker and debater. Well, at the time there, in the early 19th century, there was a lot of tension in America revolving around slavery. And Stephen Douglas was one of the men who tried to do something as a great, well-respected man to try to help the conflict that was going on in the states. And he offered what he called popular sovereignty. And the idea was this, that it should be local groups and each state that should decide for themselves. And the idea is if the majority of people want slavery, then that's the way it should be. And if the majority of people want to ban slavery, then that's the way it should be. And, we are the United States, but we're all states as well, is kind of the idea that he was putting forth. Douglas hoped that he would be remembered for helping unite a divided nation by letting be and letting majority rule. I think most of us think about our legacy and what we'll be remembered for. Maybe as a young person, you're not really there yet. You don't think about that. Maybe you're thinking about the way that your life is going to turn, and if you're ever going to be maybe famous on YouTube, or hopefully not infamous on the news, but you're wondering, like, what's my life going to look like? What's life going to look like in 20 years? But maybe for some of you, you're not thinking about 20 years from now. Or if you are, you're thinking about what people are going to remember about you in 20 years. I know that statues have kind of fallen out of fashion, except outside of coliseums and arenas and baseball fields. But it's always kind of a dream, isn't there, that maybe one day they'll erect a statue with me. They'll put something that has my likeness there. Some of the wealthy people in our country, they realize they're probably not going to ever have a statue, but maybe they'll have like a hospital or a school or some public institution, or at least a wing named after them. And so they'll give money for that. In fact, just recently here in Park Rapids, the Frank White School, wing of the school was torn down. And I don't know if some of you know, but Frank White was a member of First Baptist Church back in the early 20th century. And he was a janitor at the school and just had such a good public testimony and was so well loved that they named that school after him. Most of us, I think, though, really kind of put all of those hopes and dreams about our legacy and our heritage down to just kind of our family. I don't know about you, but I think about my great-great-great-grandparents, and I think about how different their life was than mine, and I think about, there's probably some things that are similar. I wonder how many of my mannerisms and things that I do and the way that I speak is similar to them and different from them. Of course, a lot of my ancestors weren't from America. My mom came over from England, and her dad came from Estonia, and so, I probably wouldn't even be able to speak to some of my great-great-greats, but Just this idea of the way that I think about them, I wonder who's going to think about me in that same way. And I wonder if it's going to be easy to find some things about me, or if it's going to be hard for them to find some things out about me. It's been, as a gift, years ago, I got one of these genetic kits, and you can find out kind of where you're from, and then it's connected with a website where you can then start to kind of trace out your family tree. And for a while I did that. I was really interested in that. And some people it was really easy to find some things about, and some people it was really, really difficult. And I wonder what that's going to be for me. I wonder how people are going to remember me, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, my great-great-grandchildren. How many generations before I'm just another footnote, maybe a name somewhere. Now that can be a good thing or a bad thing. Our legacy can be fruitful or it can be harmful. So I want to talk about this. Absalom was definitely thinking about his legacy in this passage in 2 Samuel chapter 18. Remember that he had courted the men of Israel, and he had stolen their hearts, it says in chapter 15, verses 1 through 4. He had staged a coup against his father and marched on Jerusalem. And now that he has control of the capital city, he's got to finish the job. He's got to go and kill his father and defeat that army in order for him to be king. Remember we said a few weeks ago that Hushai, David's friend, gave him amazing advice for David, but terrible advice for Absalom. And he took the advice of Hushai over against a man named Ahithophel, who was a very wise man, and whose advice, if it had been taken, would have been devastating for David. But God was in all of that. And so we talked about that a little bit. And now Absalom is ready to go and fight for his kingdom. Probably Absalom had hoped that he would be remembered as a great king. Now contrast this with David, who back in 2 Samuel chapter 7, this was last year that we talked about this, because we've been going through the life of David now for a year and a half. And, I don't know, it'll probably take us to the end of this year. But back last year, we talked about how when God came to David in 2 Samuel 7 and said, when David asked, can I build you a temple? God says, no, but I'm going to build you a house, meaning I'm going to make your throne be established forever. There's always going to be someone from your line sitting on the throne of God. And David, when God said, I will make you an eternal legacy and heritage, here's what David said in 2 Samuel 7, verses 18 and 19. Who am I, O Lord God? And what is my house that thou hast brought me hitherto? And this was yet a small thing in thy sight, O Lord God, but thou hast spoken also of thy servant's house for a great while to come. And is this the manner of man, O Lord God? He came in just humbly and sat before God and said, really? You're going to establish my throne forever? You're going to make sure and watch over my children and their children's children's children so that my throne is established forever? He was in wonder over that. Absalom, though, wanted to get his throne by might. And if you look at verse number 18 of chapter 18, it says, now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and reared up for himself a pillar, which is in the king's dale. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the pillar after his own name, and it is called unto this day Absalom's place. Absalom is remembered. He has a legacy today, but not a good one. We don't think of Absalom and say, that's what I'm going to be like. In fact, I don't think I know of anybody named Absalom. People don't really name it. Just like I don't know any women named Jezebel. It's just not one of those names that, why? Because there's a legacy there, but it's a tainted legacy. It's not one that is to be remembered. He didn't have children that went after him, and as we'll see in this passage, he dies, and his coup fails. And David, who God promised would sit on the throne, is back on the throne in a couple weeks here. So how do people see us in light of how we see ourselves? And I want you to think about this idea of how you're going to be remembered and known long afterward. Russ, it's interesting that you just heard a message like this last week, and as you said that, I'm like, well, you're going to hear it then twice. So Russ, this is, if nobody else, just for you. You really need to hear this. All right, so let's first of all talk about those who want to show us some leniency. Chapter 18, verse 1, David numbered the people that were with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. He's organizing the army. And David sent forth a third part of the people under the hand of Joab, his old general, and his nephew. A third part under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother. It's another nephew. And a third part under the hand of Ittai, the Gittite. We talked about him already. He was a man that was from Gath, came and stayed with David, was a great man. And now he's a third of the generally here. And the king said unto the people, I will surely go forth with you myself also. But the people answered, Thou shalt not go forth. For if we flee away, they will not care for us. Neither if half of us die will they care for us. But now thou art worth 10,000 of us. Therefore now it is better that thou succor or help us out of the city. And the king said unto them, What seemeth you best, I will do. And the king stood by the gate side, and all the people came by hundreds and by thousands. So David's got this army. He prepares to go to war, but the people hold him back. They care for him. They're not ready. He's not ready to let go. He is not ready to go, but he'll be a liability. If they say, if you go with us, then they'll go after you first, and as soon as they kill you, the battle will be over. Let's have you in this city. We'll fight your fight for you, and we'll see how this goes. They're ready to give their lives to save him. But Absalom is asking his men to give their lives for his throne. And what a difference. David's willing. He's ready to go. I'm as good as I ever was. And they're like, are you though? I mean, not really. And so they say, why don't you stay here in this city? You can help us out of the city, and we'll go and fight your battle. But still, David is thinking about Absalom, and he's thinking about him in terms of leniency. He doesn't see Absalom as the enemy. Now, Absalom constitutes a great threat. But notice what David says in verse number 5. The king commanded Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, Deal gently for my sake with the young man, even with Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains charge concerning Absalom. So they're in a fight for survival, but he says, but I don't want Absalom killed. I want to show him leniency. I want to see him again. He is not happy with what Absalom has done, from killing Amnon to staging a coup, now to trying to go to kill him. David is treating Absalom much better than Absalom, if he had his way, would treat David. There are those who will give you the benefit of the doubt and who are more ready to forgive. And you need to understand that that's a good thing. Your family, first and foremost, it's one of those things, isn't it? Have you ever had this where your family maybe bicker and you fight with each other? You can say kind of the worst things to each other, but then as soon as somebody else says something, then they all pile against you. Like, I can say whatever I want to my brother, but you better not say anything. Have you had that experience? Right? That's family. We fight, we quibble, but in the end of the day, we got each other's backs. And those are the people that are the most willing to give you lots of grace and lots of forgiveness and lots of chances. I think the same thing goes for people in your church. People in this church, if you sin, it's not like we have to keep all of that hidden, because there's a church full of people who, if you slip up in some way, if you sin against God, the Bible says in Galatians 6, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. And the idea is this, that if somebody in the church sins, we ought to not just say, well, sin is not a big deal, but we ought to, we agree that sin is a big deal, but we're glad that you're coming back. So that's a good thing. There are people in your life that are willing to forgive you and are willing to hold you accountable, yes, but also give you leniency and grace. David knows that Absalom is wrong, but he wants to see him again. There's that love. So let me say, as you're thinking about your legacy, there are people who are going to want to whitewash your legacy, and that's a wonderful thing. So don't get so hung up sometimes on the things that you haven't done, because there are people who are willing to help you in that, how you're going to be considered. Thinking about Stephen Douglas. Stephen Douglas saw that states were being admitted to the Union. The 19th century was a time of great expansion in America as the Wild West was more populated, and as the nations kept getting added, or states kept getting added and added. But there was tension because there was a question of if these states that were being admitted to the Union would be free states or slave states. And there was tension because if there were more free states being admitted, then that would eventually overturn the idea in America that we shouldn't have slavery, and some of the southern states wanted to keep that. The big question then should be when these states are being admitted, it used to be like in the Missouri Compromise, okay, Missouri can be a slave state, but that's the only one. And then here's the line, the 30th parallel, 36th parallel, and nothing above that except for Missouri. But if we add one here, then if we add a free state, we have to add a slave state. But then all of a sudden, there were tensions because, well, we don't want to be a slave state. We'd like to be a free state, and we'd also like to be a free state, and we would also like to be a free state. So how did Douglas do this? He helped repeal the Missouri Compromise and said, well, we're going to let each state decide. Now, there were two states that were going to be admitted, Kansas and Nebraska, and so he helped bring about the Kansas-Nebraska Acts of 1854. And Stephen Douglas worked with a man named Jefferson Davis a senator, to bring this about, to let them vote for themselves. And the hope was, again, to quell these tensions between the North and the South. But instead of that being a solution, what happened instead is thousands of people started moving to Kansas. People from the South, we got to make this a slave state. And people from the North, we got to make this a free state. And it wasn't just people moving there, but it was people actually fighting. It was eventually called Bleeding Kansas because so much fighting was going on over whether this state would be free or slave, and that would impact the rest of the nation. So rather than making it easier, Stephen Douglas and his legacy was that it was being harder and harder to find out what was going to happen in America. There will be lots of people with leniency in our lives, and there will be much that will be forgotten. And I don't know about you, but when I ask my children sometimes of what they remember of growing up, and I don't think they're lying when they say generally positive things. I don't know about you, but I'm just thankful that they've forgotten all the times that I think about. I think about being a harsher parent than I should have been when they were little, not very tuned in, not very forgiving. When I think about those things, I'm glad that there's a leniency there and that my legacy, what I'm saying is there's still time. There's still time. There's a passage in Ezekiel 18, and this isn't in my notes, but I'll just refer to it. But Ezekiel 18, it talks about a man who is a wicked man, and then it says, if he has a son who sees what his father's doing and that his father's wicked and decides to do the right thing, that he'll be blessed by God. And if he has a son then who decides to reject his father's things and good things and be wicked again, that's going to be on him, and everyone's going to have to answer for themselves. But it also talks about this idea of living your whole life as a good person and at the end messing up. And I see this over and over. People that are older, maybe you're in retirement, maybe you have more time. And if it's true for a young person, the more idle time they have, the more time they're probably going to get in trouble. It's also true for older people as well. That the more idle time you have, the more time that you're not investing in other people, the more time that you're just kind of living life for yourself, the more likely it is that you're going to sin in some serious way. And can I just remind you that there's a legacy there? There's all kinds of things that you've done that will be forgotten, and that's a good thing. Make it so that leniency leans in your favor, where you can say, all right, the things that I've done maybe wrong are forgotten, but I want to be remembered for the good things that I've done, for the way that I've invested in someone else. There's still time for the good that you've done to outweigh. Now, I'm not talking about this from a standpoint of heaven, okay? Heaven is not the giant scales in the sky where as long as you do more good than bad, you'll probably be fine. Don't worry about it. No, you should definitely worry about it because the Bible says that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. What's the glory of God? Well, perfection. It's always thinking the right thing. It's always saying the right thing. It's always doing the right thing. And you say, well, there's only one person that I know that's ever done that, and that's Jesus Christ. And you are absolutely right. The standard for getting into heaven is Jesus Christ. You've got to always and forever do the right thing, say the right thing, think the right thing. That's the standard to get into heaven. And you say, well, that's not me. Well, no, that's not any of us. So here's what you need then. You need, if you're going to get into heaven, not your own righteousness. You need someone else's righteousness. You need to have the robe and the cloak of Christ's righteousness in order to get into heaven. And Jesus Christ, when he went to the cross, he offered you an exchange. He went to the cross and he says, I will take your sins upon me and I will give you my righteousness. And if you this morning will simply, now again, it has nothing to do with baptism, has nothing to do with church attendance, has nothing to do with any good thing you can do. Just simply by faith, you say, God, I realize I'm a sinner. And I realize that I can do nothing to save myself. I take of that righteousness that you offer me, and I give you my sins. Will you forgive me for my sins because of what Jesus did on the cross? The Bible says that anyone who calls out to God, he will be saved. He'll be forgiven. He'll be adopted into God's family. He'll be given righteousness. He'll be made holy. And I don't know about you, but as a Christian, I don't always feel holy, but the idea is before God in heaven, when I stand before God in that judgment day, he will declare me innocent. Not because I'm a good person, not because I'm a Baptist, not because I'm a pastor. Sadly, there will be many Baptists who won't make it to heaven, many preachers, and I know some of them who will not be in heaven. But I will not be in heaven because of my righteousness. I'll be in heaven because of Christ's righteousness. And if you're somehow still hanging on to your own goodness, your own righteousness, your own religion, your own whatever it is, acts, then you need to abandon that today and take Christ's righteousness for yourself by faith. God, I accept Christ's righteousness. I ask forgiveness on the cross for my sins. God says he'll take all your sins away. You'll be forgiven. Now, isn't that a wonderful thing? Isn't that a wonderful exchange? When I'm talking about when I say there's still time for you to balance that heritage, that legacy out, I'm not talking about forever. That can be decided today. But your heritage, your legacy, that's still in question. So let me talk about then the losses that we have in life. So the fight begins, and we see that David's men prevail. I'm presuming that there are less people on David's side, but somehow, like David always does, he prevails. Verse number 6. So the people went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was in the wood of Ephraim, where the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David. And there was a great slaughter that day of 20,000 men. David's men were tough and ferocious, and they won the day. Maybe it's because Absalom's men were tired. Maybe it's because they were no match for David's fierce warriors. But I also think that God was in this. Look at verse number 8. The battle was there, scattered over the face of all the country. And it says, the wood devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. And there's a lot of different commentators on what this meant. It probably just meant that it was so thick that a lot of people got lost, got hung up. They were wounded and they couldn't get to help fast enough. Maybe they fell into a pit or tripped over a stump. We don't know exactly what that means, but it means just that they were in this wooded area and the men of Israel were falling and more people died that way than they died by the sword. Absalom sees that he's losing. In verse number 9, Absalom met the servants of David, and Absalom rode upon a mule, and the mule went under the thick boughs of a great oak, and his head caught hold of the oak, and he was taken up between the earth and the heaven and the earth, and the mule that was under him went away. As he does, he's caught in this tree, and as Absalom's hanging there, he must know that his plans were coming to an end. I don't know what this looked like. You know, there's pictures that I have as a child. Remember, he said he had long hair and it was like really thick. So I don't know if that got tangled in a branch. It says his head was caught, so maybe he caught a branch or something, but he's stuck in this tree and he can't get out. Just imagine him trying to hang there and say, this is not good. I'm stuck and my mule is gone and my men are all losing. And he's at the mercy of whoever comes along. We have many chances to make a legacy or make a difference in our lives. But often there's one off-ramp that you're going to meet at some point that can ruin the rest of your life. There was a chance maybe for Absalom to win, but as soon as now he's in this tree, there's no more chances for his legacy to be anything more than what it's going to be. And there was an off-ramp that he had at one point. He maybe could have said, you know, I don't like what's happened with my sister Tamar and what Amnon's done, and that my father hasn't done a thing about it, but I'm going to trust in the sovereignty and the righteousness of God to handle this. But instead, he took the off-ramp to go and kill his brother. And when he came back into the good graces of David, he could have said, I will be a faithful servant. All is forgiven. I'm glad for the fresh start. I'm just going to faithfully serve my king. But instead started to stage a coup. He went off that off-ramp. And it could have been that even after he came into Jerusalem, he could have said, let David come to me. Let's just set up this kingdom and let's kind of make sure that we have everything we need. Or he could have listened to Ahithophel, but instead he listened to Hushai and his arrogance and pride. And that was the off-ramp, and that was finally his undoing. There's a warning that these decisions have the potential to ruin the rest of our lives. There's a warning that that road exists and that we should avoid it at all costs. In 1 Timothy 1, verses 19 and 20, it talks about two men that were in the church, and this is really scary language. It says, holding faith and a good conscience, with which some, having put away concerning faith, have made shipwreck, of whom is Hymenaeus and Alexander. So he says there's these two guys in the church, and they've made a complete shipwreck of their faith. And what are we supposed to do with these kind of people? This is scary what Paul says, whom I have delivered unto Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme. I'm so grateful for the protection that God has given me. I don't honestly even want to know all the things that were awaiting me and all the different paths that I could have gone. I think about my high school years and decisions I had at that time and things that I could have done that would have totally changed the rest of my life. And you, if you've been alive for any length of time, know that there are times that you could have gotten on that off-ramp too, and you're so grateful that God jerked you back and put you on the path, because you wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for certain forks in the road that you took the right one and not the wrong one. You know about this, but you know that there are more coming in the future. And I think we all are aware at times that they're there, those potential off-ramps that would not only lead us into sin, but would totally destroy any good and legacy that we've done. 1 Corinthians 9, he talks about this. Paul says himself that he was aware of this off-ramp, always there. He says, I therefore so run, not as uncertainly, so fight I not as one that beateth the air, but I keep under my body. I bring it into subjection, lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. Paul was aware of his legacy, and he said, I don't want to make it so that the things that I'm preaching, I'm not living. And I, as a preacher, know, maybe better than anybody, how hard it is to be consistent. I preach some great messages that I don't always live. And Paul was just saying, there are some off-ramps there. There are some roads that I could take that would totally destroy the work that I've done and what I'm building. Stephen Douglas fought on through the catastrophe of Bleeding Kansas, and President Pierce was hurting, and so the nomination went to either Pierce or Douglas or a man named Buchanan. And Douglas, realizing that he was not going to win, finally bowed out, and Buchanan won and became the President of the United States in 1856. And the thought was that he could still keep those states separate until the Dred Scott decision came. So the Dred Scott decision, if I remember correctly, was a man who had a slave named Dred Scott moved to a free state, and since he would move to a free state, he was not supposed to have that slave anymore, but he kept him as a slave, and Dred Scott sued and said, well, if we're in a free state, I should be able to go free. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, even if you're a slave in a free state, you're still a slave. And so now all of a sudden the northern states was like, well, what does free state even mean if this is what's going to happen? We have to take drastic steps to make sure that we remain free states. And Stephen Douglas didn't know what to do about this, and so he started urging people to honor the verdict. You cannot go against what the Supreme Court says because they made a right verdict. And he made arguments that the constitutional freedoms that the founding fathers put in the Constitution were meant for white people, not for black people. He had to go further and further and further with his argument. And there was a young lawyer in Illinois that heard what Stephen Douglas was doing. He didn't really want to get into politics. He just wanted to live a simple life. But he'd heard the kind of arguments that Stephen Douglas was making and said, I've got to address this. It is my moral imperative to say something and do something about this. And so this young lawyer in Illinois started campaigning against Stephen Douglas. Your legacy should at least keep you on the right path, knowing that it can be lost. You've done a lot in your life. There have been a lot of people that have blessed the Lord for your work in their life. Do you know that can all go away? You should never take that for granted. That the legacy that you have is not a guaranteed legacy. It could be that you could lose everything. And I don't want you to be so focused on your legacy every moment of every day. There are more important things than the way you're going to be remembered. And especially if that comes to some external where I look good on the outside, but I'm going to do what I want on the inside. Understand that the outside is a reflection of the inside, and eventually that will come out. But I do, in this moment where we're talking about your legacy, just understand that is always in peril. That you're always 1 or 2 steps away from losing everything that you've built. I've done enough funerals to hear the children of godly people just bless their mothers or their fathers for everything they've done. And I've done funerals where the people said, I don't really feel anything. My parents are gone, and that's just kind of it. And I've been at funerals where they said I didn't really even know my dad. Like, what did they do? What did they, well, nothing really. There was nothing really that they left behind besides some etchings and a stone. And I think God wants more for you, and I think honestly in your best moments you want more for you as well. But what is that going to be? Just be aware that there's loss and that you could lose that very, very quickly. When you're tempted to sin, just keep that legacy in mind that it can be lost. Finally, can we talk about those who are ready to forget us? Because not everybody's going to think about you in the same way that others do as well. So this soldier sees Absalom hanging up in this tree. And he tells Joab, verse number 10, a certain man saw it and told Joab and said, behold, I saw Absalom hanged in an oak. It's just dangling there. And Joab, of course, being the good and honest man that he is, said, well, I remember that David wanted this man spared. Why don't we make sure that we cut him down and take him gently to David? End of story. Let's take the invitation, right? No. Verse 11, Joab said unto the man that told him, and behold, thou sawest him, and why didst thou not smite him there to the ground? I would have given thee 10 shekels of silver and a girdle. I would have given you money and a belt for doing that. I would have given you a reward if you just killed him right there. Nobody would have had to know. You just kill him and move on. He sees that Absalom needs to die. He's disagreeing with his king. His king says that man needs to be set free and acted with leniency. And Joab says, no, this is a dangerous guy. He cannot be allowed to live. We have to get rid of him right now. I'm making a game day decision. I'm calling an audible where we should kill him now. Now the man protests in verse 12. The man said unto Joab, though I should receive 1,000 shekels of silver in mine hand, yet would I not put forth mine hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king charged thee and Abishai and Ittai, saying, beware that none touch the young man Absalom. He's like, are you crazy? I heard what the king said. You heard what the king said. I'm not going to do that. In verse number 13, otherwise I should have wrought falsehood against mine own life. For there is no matter hid from the king, and thou thyself would have set thyself against me. You know what he says? He said, if I would have done that, you would have thrown me under the bus. You wouldn't have given me money. You would have been like, I don't know what that guy was doing. He just killed him. We all said we weren't going to do it, but that guy. He's like, I know what you would have done, Joab. And Joab in verse 14, he says, I may not thus tarry with, I don't have time for this. I'm not going to bother with this anymore. I got stuff to do. I got people to kill. I got bodies to pull out of oaks or whatever. So he goes, and in verse number 14, he took 3 darts in his hand and thrust them through the heart of Absalom while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. And 10 young men that bare Joab's armor compassed about and smote Absalom and slew him. His men finish Absalom off. Verse 16, Joab blew the trumpet. The people returned from pursuing after Israel, for Joab held back the people. He says, hey, it's over. Absalom's dead. Let's blow the trumpet. Let's stop pursuing. Let's stop killing. We can still salvage some of the army that Absalom took. They're going to be our army now. Some of these men Joab had commanded. He said, I want them back. Let's stop this. And in verse number 17, they took Absalom and cast him into a great pit in the wood and laid a very great heap of stones upon him. And all Israel fled, everyone to his tent. He dumps the body in the woods and covers it with rocks like Achan. Like someone who is forgotten. Like someone who doesn't deserve to be interred. He doesn't deserve to have any kind of memory for him at all. Why did he do that? I think Joab saw Absalom as a threat that he just couldn't live with. We know that most people will forget a majority of what we've done. And again, you can't be so, hung up on your legacy where isn't it true that there's just a lot of mundane things that we do throughout the day? You're brushing your teeth, and you're like, I wonder what people are going to think about me brushing their teeth. They're not. They're not. You're going to go to work, and you're going to, Josh isn't here. You're going to cut grass, and you know what's going to happen in a month? You're going to probably cut that grass, a couple more times. And so I know that, you want to do the best you can with whatever work you're doing, and that's great. You ought to do that. But legacy is a lifetime of those things. But just understand that most people are going to forget a lot of things that you do, and that's okay too, right? Many of us won't be known at all. Like I said, I've tried to find information on my ancestors, and it's really hard to do. I could go to a gravestone, but some of the graveyards, I don't even know where I would go to find some of my ancestors. It's sad to me, being a more sentimental person, when all of those things are kind of just discarded. We were at the dump throwing some stuff away, and we were in that big, the shed where there's the huge pile, and they got the guy with the crane and the mattress, and he's sopping everything up, and I just think, I'd love to do that for a half an hour, But anyway, I'm there, and off to the side, somebody had just dumped a bunch of stuff, and in that stuff were photo albums. Piles of them. And you look, I curious person, so I just had to look through it a little bit and look at all these photo albums. And this represents not only a lot of memories, but someone took a lot of time to put these photo albums together. And don't you know that probably some people thought to themselves, this is going to be a great thing for my kids someday. They're going to want to take these photo albums and look through them and remember all these things. And as soon as they're dead, you know what the kids have done? They've just thrown everything away. And that's hard for me to think about. When my mom passed away, my dad said, is there anything of hers that you want? And I was thinking, he's like, do you want some of her coats and clothing? I'm like, not really. But I want her Bible and I want her teacup. It's okay for me to have just a few things. But there's a lot of things my mom did in life that are just gone and forgotten. And it's okay to remember that. But it's also then, okay, so how can I be remembered? If most of the things I'm doing are going to be forgotten, then how can I be remembered? How can I think about a legacy? The truth is, I think that a legacy, a real legacy, if you want to really be remembered, it requires something extraordinary. It requires something more than just the humdrum day-to-day, which we all have to do. We all have to do those things. Vacuum the floor, you'll have to vacuum it again. Make a meal, you're going to have to make another one. I get all of that. And not every meal can be the best meal anyone's ever had. Not every sermon is the best sermon everyone's. I get all of that, all right? But in order for you to be remembered, you have to do something outside of the ordinary. And that is probably going to take some sacrifice on your part. It has to be more than just the normal life that everyone knows. Back to Stephen Douglas. Stephen Douglas ran for Senate in 1858, and he was challenged by this young lawyer out of Illinois, a man named Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln made slavery the number one platform and preached a message, made a speech that's now called the House Divided speech. He said, listen, this is not just something that we can ignore. This is going to come to a head. It's going to be something that we have to decide. And to pretend like we can just keep going the way we're going is foolishness. It's going to get bad, and it's going to get bad sooner than later. He said this, I do not expect the union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Douglas said Abraham Lincoln is calling for war. He's stoking the fires of war. And Abraham Lincoln was saying the war is coming. It has to come because we're going to be all of one or all the other. We can't keep going on such an important issue as slavery, on life. We can't keep going the way that it's going. Douglas would campaign in a city, and Abraham Lincoln would come the next day and do another speech going against everything that Douglas said. And Douglas was tired of this, and so he finally accepted a series of debates against Lincoln. So fine, this is the way it's going to go. You speak for an hour, I have a 90-minute rebuttal, and then you have a half an hour at the end to be able to speak. So we both get 90 minutes, but it's divvied up, and we'll switch off and on. And so they had these debates all throughout Illinois. And Douglas kept trying to say that the people, if they're good, will eventually vote against this. If we just let things go long enough, people will eventually come to find that slavery is bad and our country will finally accept this. Lincoln said, it doesn't matter if the majority, we should not think that might or the majority makes right. We need to say that this is a moral evil, and we need to say that right makes might. And even if we're on the losing end, we have to stand that life is important and that all men are created equal, just as the founders intended. Douglas said that the founding fathers didn't see blacks as all men, that all men were created equal, and so we shouldn't either. There was a blank check that was not cashed when the Constitution was written, and Madison and others even knew this when they wrote it. They said, we can't do anything about slavery now, but future generations. And Stephen Douglas said, well, there's a reason that they didn't include blacks in that, all men. And Lincoln came and said, no, we believe that it's all men. He said this, it is the eternal struggle between these two principles, right and wrong, throughout the world. It is the same spirit that says, you work and toil and earn bread, and I'll eat it. No matter in what shape it comes, whether from the mouth of a king who seeks to bestride the people of his own nation and live by the fruit of their labor, or from one race of men as an apology for enslaving another race, it is the same tyrannical principle. Eventually, Douglas won the Senate seat, but Lincoln ran for president with the Republicans and won. Lincoln is known for bringing the U.S. through the Civil War and through emancipation. Douglas is known for his hateful rhetoric, for the endorsement of slavery, and he's unknown by most. Maybe when I started this, you didn't even know who Stephen Douglas was, but everyone knows who Abraham Lincoln is. If he had been elected president in 1860, he would have been seen as bad as Buchanan was, who ranks almost dead last in almost every single poll. Buchanan was one of the worst presidents we had, and Stephen Douglas would have been just as bad. And there's a legacy there that I don't think he wanted. When he first sat out and said, we're going to help the nation go through all of this, he had no idea he would lose everything. Stephen Douglas has a legacy, but it's tainted, just like Absalom's is. And you may have a chance to do something for God. You may not be Stephen Terrell or Ken Mansell. You may not be someone like that, but you can make a difference in your life. You can make a difference to your kids, to your grandkids, and maybe if you do it right, to your great-grandkids as well. You could do something in your community, like I've been encouraging you in our community to get involved and to make a difference with people that you're not related to, maybe people that you won't ever see again, but maybe something that you will do will change the whole course of a family. Maybe it is that your ministering and preaching will bring someone to know Jesus Christ, and that will deliver them from sins that they would have gone down and change their whole life. It's been true for you. Someone came into your life and told you about Jesus Christ, and you accepted the gospel, and you were changed on the inside, and that has made all the difference in the world. And you're so thankful for that one person, who came into your life and said, this is Jesus Christ, and this is the difference that he'll make, and that's changed the trajectory of your whole life. And just understand, you can be that for somebody else as well. You can take a young man or a young woman in this church and help them as a young mother, as a young father, as a young person to be able to say, hey, this is the way you ought to go, and you could change their legacy, change their whole life, and maybe people wouldn't know who your name is, but you would make a difference for generations and generations and generations to come. I was talking with a friend of mine who's a pastor in town here, Justin Domagali. He's a pastor at Eastside, and he was talking to me, and pastors talk about things in ways that aren't always let me just say it's nuanced, because we're frustrated by some things, and we can talk about these things to each other. And Justin was just saying, and I agree with him. He was saying, I just don't want to do another funeral where the only thing we can say about the guy was he loved fishing and hunting. If you do, that's great. I think that's great. But listen, if at your funeral that's all we can come up with, tell me about your dad. Tell me about your mom. Well, they really liked knitting. They really liked cooking. They really liked tinkering around in the garage. They really liked reading books. Hey, nothing necessarily wrong with any of those things. But maybe there could be a legacy there. Maybe there'd be something. People who were like, oh, you're only going to let 5 people say something? Because I really wanted to say that the impact that your mom had on my life. Oh, I was kind of hoping there would be an open mic because I really want to be able to say what a difference your dad made in my life. Oh, is there a guest book or something? Because I really want to talk to the kids to tell them what a difference their parent made in my life. And maybe even something that again, whether you're ever recognized as in an award or in a newspaper article, for someone to say that person made a difference in my life. I want that kind of legacy. Not just with my kids. I mean, part of the reason I do what I do as a pastor is just to make a difference. And I'm not looking to be known for it. I don't want you to think when I say legacy that everyone has to know there's going to be a statue outside here, anything like that. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying to make a difference. Absalom tried to make a difference, but for himself. And in the end, his body was thrown into a ditch covered with rocks, and he was forgotten, except as an evil man. David's legacy, we all know about the Bathsheba thing. And yet, he's still called a man after God's own heart. What a legacy. What a legacy he had. And let me just encourage you, warn you, exhort you to think about your legacy and beware that it might be tainted.